All right, that should be it. All right, man, you ready? Boom, we're ready. We're on here, rocking and rolling. Mr. Will Long, how are you, sir?
I'm doing quite well.
Well, it's interesting because we were out here just talking earlier before we got everything started, and I was fiddle farting around with this thing and got myself lost on this OBS system. But you said you feel like you're living in a whirlwind right now.
Yeah, a
You're
little
kind of
bit.
here and all over the place.
That's a blessing at some point. At some points, for the most part, but it has been a very, very busy season for me. That's for sure.
So, when you're in the middle, I mean, you're right in the middle of campaign season, right?
Right
I mean,
in
this
the
is-
middle.
And so, what does a day in the life of someone who is campaigning? What is that like?
Well, the baseline day of mine starts early and ends late to begin with, and what the campaign has done is just fill any free time or any mental space with campaign related either tangible things to do or things to think about or things to plan out or places to be.
Mm-hmm.
Any free times out of it. So my days start at either 5 or 5:30, and they run not just me sitting around working, but me going to places and meeting with people and responding to people and talking with people on the phone all the way well into the night, 9 to 10 p.m. typically.
And so, some folks listening may not even be aware, but what is it that you're running for?
I'm running for Superior Court Judge in District 22A, which is Iredell and Alexander County.
Okay.
There's 2 Superior Court Judge seats in this area. The Chief Superior Court Judge seat is Joe Crosswhite, and then the seat I'm running for is the Resident Superior Court Judge seat.
And what's the difference between? Because someone asked me this question, and I felt real stupid because I didn't know the answer. But what is the difference between someone who is a Superior Court judge versus a District Court judge?
The easiest way to explain that is
Yeah, keep it easy, man. You know me, I'm not very bright.
it can get complicated, but there's a criminal part of court and there's a civil part of court. In district court in North Carolina, there's a civil district court and a criminal district court. In Superior, there's a civil superior court and a criminal superior court. In criminal superior court is felonies and up, including murder. In civil superior, it's lawsuits 25,000 and up. That's the easiest way to describe the difference. There are some things that have what's called exclusive jurisdiction in one court or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Family law, for example, is exclusively in district court. So the 25,000 up threshold would not affect a family law case, for example. But by and large, the difference is in the criminal context, misdemeanors are in district, felonies are in superior.
So you're going to be potentially, if you get elected, you're going to be sitting across from and having to the fate of those people are going to be in your hands of what you decide or a jury decides.
Yes, sir.
Whew. Is that a lot of pressure?
Yeah,
I mean, do you think
absolutely.
it will be a lot of pressure?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't take that lightly at all. But I'm prepared for it.
Right. I'm sure. I mean, you wouldn't be running for the seat, or running if you weren't prepared for it.
Yeah.
But the seat is not available. There is someone else that you're running against, someone who's been in that seat for a while, correct?
Julia Lynn Gullett has been in there for one term, and one term in Superior Court years is 8 years.
Oh, wow. It's an 8-year term.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Judge Gullett has been in there for 8 years, and she's a fine person. You won't hear me say anything bad about Judge Gullett.
I've only heard good things about her. And to be fair, if she's a listener, she wants to come on in, she can too.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important too that everybody. Number one, we need more voter turnout. Period. Just number one. Okay. And hopefully, with you throwing your name into the campaign, hopefully it's going to bring folks our age and younger to the polls to vote.
I'm hopeful for that.
And I think so. I think there's been some younger folks in the town run for certain positions and offices, so I think it's going to help.
Yeah, this is going to be a very competitive race.
Oh,
And so I've got to take my message to all age groups. But I have particularly enjoyed speaking with the younger voting demographic. Last night I spoke with about 15 high school kids about what a Superior Court judge is and what it means. And I teach at Mitchell still.
so you do teach at Mitchell?
I teach at Mitchell.
What do you teach at Mitchell?
I teach at Mitchell business law, introduction to business, principles of banking, principles of management, contracts part of the paralegal certification course, and That's all at this point. I think I'm missing one. Intro to business, principles of banking, principles of management, business law, and contracts, 5 courses.
Jeez, and contracts.
Contracts.
I may need to talk to you after this.
I get that a lot.
I bet so.
But I get a chance to talk in class to also typically a younger group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been explaining the difference between a district court judge and a superior court judge very specifically to a group of business law kids for the last 2 years anyway. So now I'm actually living it. And I get that question all the time. What is a superior court judge? And you're right. Most people, young, middle-aged, and old, are not active voters.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they are, they will gloss over the judicial election.
Right.
I've asked a lot of people pointed questions that sound like this. Have you ever known a judge that you voted for? Or do you remember the last judge you voted for? And very often that answer is, no, I do not, or no, I have not.
Oh my gosh, I would say the overwhelming majority of people do not know a judge by their first name.
So I have undertaken over the last 4 weeks, and I will turn that effort up over the next 4 weeks, in making sure that people know what the Superior Court judge role is here, why it is important, and why I fit into that, and why I think I'll be a tremendous asset to this community from that seat.
So, what is it that, inspired you to want to run? Was there one single event or?
There was one single event. There was a seed that was planted, and insofar as somebody looked at me and said, you should consider running for the Superior Court judge's seat because I think you would win it. And I looked at him and thought to myself, that sounds wild.
That sounds wild.
That sounds, I dismissed it.
Yeah.
I dismissed it. And then for about 2 months, I started really struggling with the idea of it. I was really drawn to the idea in a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
I was really wary about what it meant. I was really hesitant to change what I'm doing now or to put myself out there, because you won't find anybody who's ever run a campaign that tells you this is a pleasant experience.
Oh, I imagine it's not. I mean, look, we're in the national election season now, and look at that.
Yeah, there's people will tell you misleading things. People will tell you flat out dishonest things. People will expect for you to say things that may not be in line with who you really are. I have not done that, and I have sort of told myself I'm not going to go that route. But it's a generally uncomfortable experience. For me, the more I thought about the Superior Court judge's seat, the more I realized that this is probably a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The opportunity is what grabbed me. And then the idea of influence from there is what really drew me in. I know that I am capable of being a good Superior Court judge. My education and my experience, and I can go way into that, make me capable of being a good Superior Court judge in the courtroom. But I also realize how much influence that seat has in our broader community. And I realize that it's not an obligation of a Superior Court judge to give him or herself away outside of the courtroom, but it is an opportunity. So I've told anybody who would listen, they would say, well, you would say Judge Gullett is a good person. I would say very much so. Why then would you be better for that seat than her? It's because I am capable of being more involved with our community outside of the courtroom. There are some courtroom specific things that I'll go in that I think would make me a better appointed Superior Court judge in the courtroom, particularly on the civil side, because that's where my experience has been. But primarily, I see it not as an obligation of a Superior Court judge, but as an opportunity to use the influence of that seat to move things in the community, to still be involved.
So, and to move things, you mean like, for an example, like to move things in the community?
Well, on the smaller scale, if you're the Superior Court judge, and this is akin to any what would be considered a high elected official, you're being involved in things carries some weight, more so than it does if I'm involved just now. At a very basic level, somebody would say they've got the Superior Court judge involved in their effort, for example. That carries some weight. more specifically, from that seat, this is the same thing that I get in my world now. I get exposed to things, and that perspective is unique, and I can advance ideas that only I can see from there. From a Superior Court judge's seat, you are exposed to very specific things that are relative to the criminal courts and the civil courts. And you have an opportunity, because you're on the front line, to put a finger on issues and errors that you see and voice opinions about it. Maybe advance ideas to change.
Mm-hmm.
For me, as a Superior Court judge in the civil courtroom, I can tell you I will not hesitate to get rid of a lawsuit that's used as a weapon. I will, if there is any way possible within the bounds of law for me to get rid of a lawsuit when I see it being used as a weapon, because that's not how it's intended to be, I will advance on it without hesitation.
Can you provide an example of something like that without?
Well, the broadest example is the plaintiff's injury that's taken, the personal injury context is taken advantage of, the sue at the drop of the hat.
Because that is, I mean, you can sue anybody for anything now, right?
Absolutely. So, and once you're drug into the swamp,
Yeah.
it can be hard and costly to get out, whether or not there's a merit. I've told civil clients of mine all the time, ahead of the lawsuit being filed, when you kind of see it coming, they'll say, should I expect a complaint? And I'll say, I cannot do anything to prevent somebody from filing a stupid lawsuit. I can't. And once they're in there are certain costs that are going to be generated before I can get rid of this. You're going to have to pay for an answer and or a motion to dismiss. You're going to have to pay for a limited appearance, at least on those two things, for example. So I guess that's the easiest example to share. In the context of the criminal courtroom, you have a front line. I think your voice is more influential when you start talking about things like bail reform and or prison reform.
Mm-hmm.
My voice as a sitting Superior Court judge with respect to any issue relative to the courtroom carries more weight if I am a Superior Court judge, just inherently.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I may say the same thing that I do now, but the position gives that voice a little bit more weight.
And is there certain laws that you've seen? Well, it's interesting too, because my wife just had to go to court because she was a witness. Somebody decided to pull up in a car beside her, and
She got subpoenaed, I suppose.
yeah, he decided it was time to take care of some business while staring at her in his car. If you know what I mean. So yeah.
Wow.
So that was
That's frowned upon.
it is, and you can be arrested for that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but she said, it's just, she was amazed to see how busy the courtroom was, and people from all walks of life and what they're arrested for were being sued for. And she said it was just like, no wonder, the justice system, people say, is screwed up or backlogged or needs to be redone, because it just seems like you said, once you get into the swamp, it's hard to get you out.
It's a grind. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of people who will use the limited discretion they have as a crutch. I would like to think that I'm blessed with a certain level of impatience, and I can promise you cases will move quickly in that courtroom.
well, there's a lot of people probably happy to hear that.
Yeah.
And there's probably some people going, oh, no. That is not what we want to hear.
Right.
But those are,
it's not lost on me that I don't have full control of the courtroom as a sitting judge. I have full control of some aspects. I have full control of decorum, and I can have some influence on pace. The district attorney in the criminal context has a great deal to do with the pace of the courtroom as well. But if I have any say-so at all, it will be that cases will move swiftly through my courtroom.
So before you were decided to run for Superior Court judge, what after high school? Because we did go to high school together.
Yeah.
What did you do? You went to college, and then what?
So I graduated Statesville High School in 1999. I went to the University of South Carolina and graduated in 2003 with a finance degree. I came back to Mooresville, and I was running. I started working for Piedmont Bank in and around Mooresville at the Plaza Drive office and then the Williamson Road office. This was in 2004 to 2006. I had worked for a couple of years in college at First Citizens Bank in South Carolina while I was there,
Right.
and started in the area of commercial lending. So I had an opportunity to meet a lot of people in and around Mooresville. Moved into a branch management role. And then in 2006, I left and went to Wake Forest University for an advanced business degree. I got my MBA degree. And by that point, I had the idea in my mind. I was really drawn to, I really looked up to practicing attorneys
Mm-hmm.
here locally. I really looked up to how meaningful their interaction was with people.
Mm-hmm.
I always had a heart to help, to serve. That's always the heart I've had. And banking just wasn't advancing that. So I could have made a very safe living being a banker, but I was drawn to something more. And so after MBA school, I went to law school, and it's still at that point, I still had finance on my mind. I had a desire to go to New York and work on Wall Street and as an investment banker. And I started down that path. I worked in the summer of 2007 for Sandler O'Neill and Partners in New York. And then came back to Wake Forest and started law school, and my path started changing then. The more I got involved with the law and the courts, the more my direction and focus and desire changed. I started working with the Juvenile Public Defender's Office in Winston as an externship in law school. And the interactions that I had with kids there largely defined where I would go as a career.
Dude, that's pretty wild that you were in the banking industry, in the finance, and you saw like you said, a comfortable financial future for yourself.
Oh yeah, very.
And you were like, you know what?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go help people instead.
Well, this was the path. This was the path.
I'm telling you, dude, there's not a lot of people who are going to take that path.
Well, it got wilder than that.
Do tell.
When I was working at Sandler O'Neill's in New York in the summer of 2007, I would leave and go to serve coffee to the homeless on the steps of Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church, catty corner to the Tiffany's. And I had no idea that was setting roots for spending my full-time work week at the homeless shelter now, but it did.
Dude, that's
just 10 years later.
There's something you saying that just reminded me of the Netflix documentary. It's a couple years old, and I think it's called Park Avenue on Park Avenue or Park Avenue to Park Avenue. But it's talking about how you have the Tiffany's here at one end of Park Avenue, but if you go however many miles to the other end of Park Avenue, it's like the most impoverished part of New York City.
So I grew up in Statesville, really not liking New York at all. I really don't know why. It's just, I guess everybody said that we shouldn't like New York.
Yeah, that's what they say.
But I ended up really having a heart for it, and because I learned so much there.
Absolutely.
And I learned about socioeconomics. I learned about how different the available resources to any one given person have an effect on opportunity, namely.
Speaking of not enjoying or shouldn't like New York, being from the same place, my wife and I, we go to New York. We've been there a few times since we've been married. I absolutely love that place. Would not want to live there.
Yeah.
Okay. However, I get to go there. I get to visit. It's a culture shock, and I appreciate the culture shock.
Yeah.
Of how different it is that people live. I mean, they're on top of each other. You're riding the subway.
Yeah.
You're getting to feel something different than what we feel here.
Yeah.
And you get to appreciate here when you come back.
I do that genuinely, and so I chose to come back on purpose. But I actually like the pace up there sometimes. Because it is.
The one thing about interesting too, because we live in a place now where a lot of transplants. Folks from the Northeast and up north are moving down here, and they bring that sense of pace and that sense of lifestyle. Yeah. And I work with a lot of doctors who are from up that way, and I got to be honest with you, I'm attracted to that. I like that. I like that fast pace,
speed.
I like that quick wit, quick talking, quick thinking, and if you're waiting on them, you're backing up. So. Right. Yeah. I appreciate that. And I think sometimes, we around here could probably use a little more of that,
Yeah.
but it's also good to slow down and watch the sun come up and kick back and drink some sweet tea.
Yeah, sometimes I wish I did a little bit more of that. There'll be time for that.
There'll be time
after
for
March
that.
3rd.
That's right. So that election day, March 3rd?
March 3rd, yeah.
So you were in New York, you came back here, and then once you came back here, then what happened?
I graduated, finished law school, and I had worked. I was finishing MBA school and law school, and I was working 10 hours a week for an investment bank remotely, just doing spreadsheets all day. And then working for a private practice law firm in Raleigh. And so after I graduated from Wake in 2010, I went to private practice in Raleigh with a firm that eventually became Bryant, Ivy and Long. I worked there until 2014. That's sort of where I cut my teeth.
Okay.
And my practice was, in some ways, it was a blessing going there to work right out of law school, because if I would have gone to a larger law firm, there would have been a very structured development program. The guy I went to work for in downtown Raleigh gave me a group of files on my first day and said, "You've got court in a half hour."
What?
And you should pay. And this was at that point district court, so it's not nearly as overwhelming as it was.
No, it sounds overwhelming, dude.
It was to me at the time.
Well, yeah. It's kind of like...
I had already worked with him, and I had already had a third-year practicing license, so I was already a little bit familiar. But still, that's not the standard style of development.
That's like your dad throwing you out of the boat saying swim.
Yeah, pretty much. And I sort of resented that at the time, but as time went on, I realized how important that was for me to jump in there and get in the fire, because in the practice of law, the only way that you can learn is to get in the game. The only way you can learn is to get in the courtroom and feel that pressure, to feel what it feels when somebody's beside you, really dependent on what you do.
You know what, man? That's some heavy stuff, because this guy sitting here doesn't really know. Most of them don't really know what's going on or understand the law and the complexity of what they could be facing. So literally, their future is in your hands of how well you present your case for them.
At times, yeah.
God, I can remember, being
I don't create the facts, but
right, but you hope to present the facts in a way that helps your client.
Particularly in the context of business, civil, superior. When somebody's business and livelihood are on the line, and you see a family behind them, and you know where they're coming. That is when you grow.
Is there a case that still bothers you that you've had in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. A case. I know how powerful it is for a superior court judge in the civil courtroom to render a wrong ruling. I've seen that happen, and this one was in Catawba County, and I'm not going to name the judge.
Sure.
Just nobody relevant to the election, but it was a covenant not to compete case, and there were a number of claims that were around that, but it was a covenant not to compete case, which means that one company had hired the employee of another company, and the other employee had an employment agreement that said you can't hire. If you leave here for any reason, you can't work for anybody else. You've probably seen something like that at some point in time. And those are frowned on in North Carolina if they're too broad, because North Carolina law recognizes that you ought not to be able to prevent somebody from making a living. And my guy had a provision in there that said if you leave for any reason, you can't work for any customer that we have ever had.
Ever. Damn, that's broad.
And this was an electrical company. So the intent of that might have been well intended, but the effect of it was that anybody this electrical company had done business for or with.
And that kind of eliminates...
That's pizza place, that's anywhere.
Sure.
You can't work there. And
that's going to be hard to find a job.
I know. And so on a motion for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction, which is something that you file right when you file the complaint.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be an extraordinary measure. This judge said, I agree with the plaintiff. After he heard arguments, I knew he was wrong when he was saying it, but there was nothing I could do. And he said, I'm going to award it. I'm going to put a high bond in place just in case I'm wrong, which I guess he felt was a safety. But the effect of that was for 3 months. It took me 3 months to fix this. I worked for free because he couldn't afford to
Right.
pay anything. And I felt so broken because I felt it wasn't my fault, but I felt responsible.
Sure.
This guy was prevented from working anywhere. The original judge had made that ruling to award a preliminary injunction based on a likelihood of success on the merits of the claim. I knew that was wrong. I knew this was against every bit of case law that existed. But I had to watch this guy almost lose his wife and his family and his house because he can't work anywhere. It took me 3 months to get lucky enough to get that case on a summary judgment motion in front of a business court judge
So
who determined as a matter of law their claim could not exist and threw everything out. That doesn't get him his 3 months back.
right, but it gave him the opportunity to get back to work.
Yes.
Damn. See there now.
And that's just one of many. I mean, any lawyer would have stories for days that
Sure.
that would seem incredibly intense to. It would actually be an interesting radio show for you to just invite people in for Thursday. About Thursday is a good time to ask people how their week's going.
I've got that's not a bad idea, and I got a couple other maybe guests up my sleeve
Yeah.
to tell some
I
good
would
stories.
focus on because the civil realm is arguably more complex and it's more difficult to practice there.
Mhm.
I could make a very good argument for that. It's business related, but if you want good stories, those generally will come from the criminal.
Oh, just
Criminal
from my wife
spirit.
sitting in there for
Yeah.
hours and the dude not showing up, the stories that she had just from sitting there. She
Yeah.
even said she might even take a day off of work
Yeah.
and just go sit
Yeah.
because it's entertaining. Sad,
It
but entertaining.
It is a tough place to be, but I've told people from the first time I started practicing, even in law school, that you don't really know your community until you spend time in the courtroom. Go in there. I'm not talking about it even as a defendant or
Mhm.
a plaintiff or a witness. Go in and see what goes on in there. Listen to the calendar call. Go to the clerk's office and look at the calendar. Look what's going on. There's real life going on. And a lot of it is not happy times.
Well, speaking of real life, what you do now, you probably see the realest people in the real life.
Yes, sir.
More so than most.
Yes, sir. And that. I think that has prepared me for what's next.
And what is it that what is it you do now? So you were practicing
Mhm.
and then you shifted into
I was
what you're doing now?
I went back to New York for a short bit, and then back to Statesville in 2015. And
Okay.
in 2015, by that point, I had my own law firm because when I left Raleigh to go to New York, I left the firm I was with and started my own law firm. That was 2014. And still just getting calls, not marketing, not putting a website out there, just fielding calls for help. And
So this is in New York you had your office.
well, I was not licensed to practice in
Okay.
New York, but I was coming back to Raleigh a fair good clip.
I got you.
And when I came back to Statesville, I was working with Pope McMillan and Bill Pope.
Yeah.
And Bill Pope, I probably learned more about being an attorney and really being a man from Bill Pope than anybody else in my professional career.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible person.
And what is the one nugget of wisdom that he has shared
Oh,
with
man.
you?
My favorite part of wisdom he said recently is I talked to him on the phone and I said, Bill, they're saying I don't have enough experience to be a good Superior Court judge. What do you think about that? And he said, you have them call me. You have them call me. Anybody that tells you that, you have them call me.
That's important though when you have a guy who has practiced law for how many decades?
He is, I think he got his 50-year certificate while I was there, but he was the county attorney for 40 years, I think,
Wow.
in addition to the private practice. But he's got business clients for days. I mean, still to this day that call him to put out fires.
But I mean, that's got to give you a little bit of wind in your sails, a little pat on the back that you know what,
Absolutely.
if someone like Pope can have that amount of confidence in me, then
Absolutely.
I must be doing something right.
Absolutely. And he saw me cut my teeth in the North Carolina Business Court. And the North Carolina Business Court is the most practice intensive forum in our state judicial system.
Really?
Every motion has to be briefed. And every motion, save for a few exceptions. So it's a highly litigation driven avenue. A lot of case law. It's a pure practice of law. Really expensive.
I got to be honest with you. It sounds miserable.
Uh,
Like you keep talking about
parts.
all this stuff, man.
Yeah.
There is not a. Thank God for people like you
Yeah.
and other folks, especially attorneys who are doing it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But man, I can barely, put two sentences together.
Yeah.
Much less try to go out there and defend someone or read. I mean, God, man, you've had to read like 1,000 books.
I can't. People ask me all the time, what do you read for fun? I was like, I avoid reading like the plague. I've read. I've done that. I've done the reading thing.
I've done the reading.
I'm good for something else. But yeah, case law research, and brief wars in the North Carolina Business Court were an incredible learning experience. Looking back, I had to go through that to be capable of being a Superior Court judge now.
So now you're at Fifth Street.
Now I'm at Fifth Street, yep. So after Pope McMillan, I left Pope McMillan, the transition started at the beginning of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been about 2 full years that I've been at Fifth Street at this point. I was approached with the opportunity to work at Fifth Street, and the role, it was a new role. It was designed as this director of development role, and the idea was that they needed someone to help share their story.
Yeah.
And what it evolved into is telling people about what we do, but also, because we're a nonprofit with limited resources, plugging all kinds of holes and working with Patty about management related issues like planning, administrative, personnel. I handle all of the legal issues. And most people don't realize how big of an organization we've become. We've got a $1.36 billion budget.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I would have never imagined.
Well, a lot of people don't realize how many people we work with.
Right.
Because if you're not familiar with Fifth Street, you would think that we just are that one facility. Mm-hmm. And that one facility on the south side is where we have tonight we have 104 men, women, and children. We also have my sister's house. That's a domestic violence sanctuary. Mm-hmm. And that's a homeless outreach in a different way. That's not a resource-based homelessness. That's law enforcement picks you up in the middle of the night and takes you and your kids to the sanctuary. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the Veterans Transitional House working with homeless veterans. That's on Wilson Lee Boulevard.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. The Mooresville Home House is falling under our umbrella right now in a partnership type of way.
Okay.
And so in addition to those functional programs and facilities, we're involved with all kind of indirect efforts. We've got nurses on staff, counselors on staff, case managers who are working with these people to try to get from one place to the next. One place being homelessness, the next place being home, whatever that means.
Even though that's a big number that you gave that's in the budget, with what you just rattled off, every single dime is crucial.
Absolutely. We're holding it together. I don't mind to say that. I mean, we are. Patty told me the second week I went to work there, she said, we will always be provided for. Because I went to work there from a very corporate background. Mm-hmm. The finance arena, the civil superior arena, both are very rules-driven, planning oriented, planning rewarding places. You plan for something, you set goals, you achieve them. That's it. Nonprofit does not work like that.
No.
We can try to do that, but
Right.
there's so many moving pieces and limited resource that you just can't do it. You have to operate on faith. The only way you get there. So I would lose my mind because we're not organized enough, and Patty would say, "We will be provided for," and we would.
I got to be honest with you, man. You know, my wife and I own a junk business, and it's great to have the jobs, which is awesome. But one of the most rewarding, if not the most rewarding part of what we do is when we're able to take furniture and donate to Fifth Street. And I haven't got to see
Goes
it,
a long way.
but to know that somebody is going to, get up on their feet and get a job, and they're going to find a place to live, and they're going to take the furniture that we donated and have at least a couch to sleep on, or a bed or something like that.
So it sounds like a very simplistic thing to say, but this is a very real scenario. The couch that you put there, if our space will allow for us to keep it, will go to somebody who has overcome a crisis beyond what you and I can realize and has gotten back on their feet to permanent housing, shelter of their own, and they're either going to have a couch or not.
I mean, it's that simple.
That's
Right.
it. So sometimes getting the housing is amazing, and that's the goal. But if we can set somebody up not to fail, that's really what we're striving to.
Sure.
The Charlotte Area Realtors Association has a foundation, and they just changed their name to the Canopy Foundation. And they gave us a grant in, I guess it was September, that was directed towards, it was funds directed towards building a storage shed so that we can keep more furniture than we do.
Have y'all started construction of the shed yet?
We did.
You did.
It's done. It's up.
It is up. Because I keep going to the back.
Okay,
And-
if those sheds are falling in, the ones that you're by,
Oh, yeah.
this one is on the other side of the greenhouse as you're pulling in.
Oh, okay. All right. I always go to the back and talk to Mike.
Mike is incredible.
He is
For those of
incredible.
you out there who don't know Mike, Mike is an incredible man. He is in charge of our stuff, and we got a lot of stuff.
You got a lot of stuff. But what
Yeah.
people didn't realize that I've talked to along the way is they want to go donate. They're like, hey, can you go donate this? Yeah, absolutely. And they're like, yeah, just take it to Goodwill. And I'm like, hey, do you mind if I take it to Fifth Street? And I explain that to them. And they
Yeah.
go, oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
I've got stuff I can take down there. So I also try to tell customers, there are other places than Goodwill, although that's fine and dandy. But there are people who can really, really use this.
Yeah.
And
We
they don't
use
have
it.
to pay for it.
Yeah, Mike gets overwhelmed with our stuff sometimes, but we got 115 people at any given time living with us in our house. That's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff.
And a lot of them aren't coming in with anything, but we try to have them stuffed by the time that they're going on.
Sure.
So that's a lot of stuff. And people see our storage area and they'll say they're most times amazed about how big it is. For example, when you first saw the basement, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
realize that is a lot of clothes.
Yes.
But we fly through that stuff.
Oh, I'm
We fly
sure.
through it.
I mean, you got 115 people, and it's sometimes more.
Yep. Yep. There, and then plus my sister's house and plus the veterans house. So we operate in infinite need. And people just say, kind of may not take that lightly, and they shouldn't, but there's infinite need.
I think it's awesome that you have a background from the finance, law, New York, here, Fifth Street, and that you're going to try to take all of that and put it in a seat and try to make a difference.
I have convinced myself that I was made for it.
Well, I don't think you
struggled.
have to convince, man. I think it's real.
It is genuine. I think my number one quality is I'm genuine. I'm either the worst politician of all time or the best. Depending
That's
on
fair.
who you ask.
You've always been, straight shooter, no shit.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Well,
And I
that's me.
appreciate that.
What you see is what you get.
Right.
I am who I am. I think most people that know me know that I give myself away as a genuine act of service, and that's how I choose to live my life. And now I see an opportunity to give myself away on a greater level. And so this was not a decision that was made lightly. If there was one hesitation about my running for the Superior Court judge seat, It was the idea that if I won, I would leave it. I would not be at Fifth Street.
Well, that's a question I had. So if you win, will you still be able to perform your duties now at Fifth Street?
I will still. I have promised myself, and I'll live up to this promise. I have promised myself that I'll still lead devotions on 7:30 in the morning at Fifth Street in the day room. I have promised myself that I will be an active member in whatever way I can. I don't know if I could be a board member or not, given conflict of interest policies with state level grant funding. But people ask me all the time, they say, "Are you still going to be at Fifth Street?" And I say, I can't tell you exactly what that'll look like. I can tell you I'll still be around. I'll still be in the kitchen. I'll still be leading devotion on Tuesday mornings, talking about threads of faith and telling people they're loved. And I'll do all of that. 7:30 in the morning on Tuesdays is open door, by the way, if anybody wants to come. Just show up. But I can't get rid of Fifth Street. It's not like Fifth Street is as much a part of me as my right arm.
Well, I was going to say, you can tell you talking about it, you can see it and you can feel it. Like Fifth Street is something that you're never going to turn your back on.
No.
You're always going to have something to do, and you're going to have not just a name, but you're going to have a physical presence there.
Yeah. Fifth Street is part of my path, and I'm not sure, I haven't really thought this through, but I don't think it would be a stretch for me to say I am more thankful for the time I've spent at Fifth Street than anywhere else professionally.
No, I believe it. I think that has molded you and given you something an opportunity that you've seen that you can go do something with and help people. Absolutely. And take that and go, but not leave those folks, but go do something with that.
Yeah. I just think I can always have a voice at Fifth Street. We can all have a voice anywhere we are, but I can really have some influence from the Superior Court judge seat. And my priority would, of course, be to do a good job in the courthouse.
Right.
And I'm prepared to focus on that. But it's not lost on me that the Superior Court judge seat carries a very large amount of influence. And the things that I see, I can have a voice about on a different level than what I have now.
Well, you and I were talking beforehand, when you were coming on about the time and whatnot, and I said, are there any laws that are on the books that are just, I think I said stupid or ridiculous or that are laughable? And you said, yeah, there's an entire book about it. Is that it right there? What is it?
This is a book that my mother gave me for Christmas. I've read about 2 minutes of it.
Ludicrous Laws and Mindless Misdemeanors.
Yes. There's an actual whole book out there. So
off the top of your head, what is the most ridiculous law that you've ever come across?
In person,
or studied that in school or whatever.
Well, I'm not sure it's ridiculous, but it's always been interesting. Whenever I've done any real estate research, title research, it's interesting. Usually, if I've done a closing, when I was at Pope McMillan, they have a real estate staff, and I could do closings for some friends of mine. You have to have a whole staff to do that because of the regulations around it. But when I was at Pope McMillan, I could do that. And I'll just tell you the Troutmans, for example. So the Troutmans were buying their home, and they asked me to help them out. And I said, that'd be great. Let me do some title research on that. And you only have to go back 40 years to get a valid title opinion.
Only 40. Sounds like a lot.
Yeah. Well, in the grand scheme of things. But usually I like to go as far back as I can within reason, because usually you'll always find some kind of deed restriction and way back in there that will seem odd. So if I'm recalling off the top of my head, the Troutmans cannot have any more than 2 swine in their backyard. And so if you see,
so if you drive by and you see more than 2 pigs back there,
then call them in.
Are you serious?
I mean, it's not effective anymore, and it's not even.
But that's hilarious.
Yeah, back then, well, you'd have to think
that's probably
the historical context. I mean, back then, everybody was having livestock around. So at some point, somebody said, "Well, it'd be good, or I'm going to develop this area, but let's have some order here."
That's right.
Nobody getting out of hand here. Let's keep it to 2 swine, maybe a couple chickens each,
but no more than 2.
Because there'd always be that guy.
Of course, there's always that guy who wants to stretch and break and get 3 pigs.
Right.
Jackass. Right. Ruins it for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. But I was looking in here on the way over here, It was. I mean, some of this stuff is just going to sound funny if I say it on the radio.
Well, it's all right.
But in Kentucky, it is illegal to use reptiles during religious services.
Huh. And I would say most people just at face value would say, don't they do that all the time in Kentucky?
Yeah, right. Right. So you learn something new.
I did learn, if nothing else. See, that's the whole show. We won't listen, laugh, and learn. We just learn.
I think it was in New Mexico. It's illegal to sell imitation honey, even if it's labeled imitation honey.
What the hell is imitation honey?
It's mine. I don't know, but I don't even want to know.
I don't even want to taste it.
But there's all kind of stuff out there. Most of it's just historically dated that makes it irrelevant now. Some of it is just a product of what happens when a legislature of this many different people can just get sidetracked.
One of the reasons I was asking you about that crazy law is because I don't know if you've been so busy you probably don't even watch TV, but the Netflix series about Aaron Hernandez.
I have been told that's really intense.
It's really intense, and it's interesting. I can't remember the name of the law now, and I should. But basically, in the state of Massachusetts, at the time when he was convicted, there was this old law that had been on the books for a century or whatever. But essentially, if you were found guilty of a crime, and you are, what's it called when you appealing? Okay, you're in the appeals process, and you died during the appeal.
Yeah.
Then you are then found not guilty of the crime that you were convicted of.
I guess that's a courtesy.
I guess. However, so the theory is that he was found not guilty of the two previous murders. I don't want to ruin this for you because, spoiler alert, he's dead. Okay. He hung himself. So therefore he is dead. And now that since he was not guilty of the Odin Lloyd murder, he now is entitled to the $40 million.
Oh, wow.
He's not.
Yeah,
his wife and child.
The estate.
The estate. And it was called something. People listening be like, it's called blah, blah, dummy. Yeah. But then they went back and they appealed that, the family of the victim, Odin Lloyd, and they actually threw that law out and it's no longer on the books or whatnot. Yeah. So I don't think his family actually end up getting any of that money.
Well, that's actually a good example of the extreme it takes to make a change sometimes. Because if you have a family that's less well known than Aaron Hernandez, for example, who just lacks resources to go at something like that, the law just remains. So that's actually a good example of how sometimes it takes a really extreme something to go on for people to pay attention.
The other interesting part of that during the interviews was they said that Robert Kraft would have spent more than $40 million to have it thrown out.
I don't know. Because he was predisposed in all kinds of different ways in South Florida.
Later. This was later, after the fact. Right. So if this would have, if he'd have went to the old rub and tug a year before, this may have been, he may have had a different perspective. Who knows?
I can't touch that.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. And being with your experience, you probably would find that whole thing it's fascinating.
Yeah. And
it's intriguing. And from a lawyer standpoint, from an attorney looking at it, I don't know, man.
Sometimes there's a fine line for a lawyer between intriguing and mind-numbing. Because it may very well start as an intriguing thing, and you might be intrigued with it, and then you realize how complex and how much of an uphill battle it is to change.
So let me ask you this. And this isn't your area of expertise, I guess, but you may know the answer. If, let's say that someone has been accused of murder,
okay,
and the defendant has hired the attorney, to represent them, do you ever ask, did you do it? Does the attorney ever go, look, did you kill him or not?
I think more times than not, most people think as non-attorneys that there's like this great mystery around most of the cases. And more often than not, The facts are really lay out the story better than the story will. I think that any attorney always has to balance what his client says with what is readily available.
Or don't say that.
Or
I didn't hear that. Because then let's say that they, the question was asked and go, hell yeah, I killed him. Mm-hmm. Then the attorney has, how did they go and defend like this guy's not guilty?
Well, it's not always a not
tough.
guilty thing. And I had this experience when I was working with the public defender's office in law school in Winston and shadowing some of their guys, because you get that question a lot. They say, how can you defend this guy? You know he's guilty. Mm-hmm. And I would say, it's not about that a lot of times. A lot of times it's just standing beside this guy to make sure he doesn't get railroaded. It's not that I'm trying to prove innocence. He knows he's getting ready to plead guilty. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that if he pleads guilty on his own, that's...
Right. But the guy who says I'm not guilty.
The guy who says he's not guilty is a little bit more rare, but that's where you get the great mystery. Mm-hmm. All right. So
I think the attorneys know, like, oh yeah, he did it, but don't tell me.
I think all the attorneys are human. Mm-hmm. But generally speaking, when you're an attorney and you're in there for so long, fighting for a position, sometimes there's a tendency to convince yourself of a certain way.
Do attorneys have a high burnout rate?
Incredible.
Yeah, they have to, man. Because you guys are grinding all day.
There is a requirement every year that, I think it's every year, every other year. I do it every year just because I find them interesting. But there's a mental health and substance abuse requirement for attorneys for continuing education.
That is, so you have to go to some sort of counseling. Mm-hmm.
It's not a one-on-one counseling, although that would probably be great for every attorney that ever walked. Or any person.
No, for sure.
But it's various seminars about substance abuse and interesting things that attorneys struggle with. Compassion fatigue is one of them.
I believe it. We had Andrew Dewana on here, who's the first responder support service.
He would struggle with a lot of that same stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's something that should be, if not required, at least offered for doctors and nurses, EMS, fire, when they have to do their continuing education, that they have to have some sort of, because we see a lot of horrible stuff.
Yeah, first responders in particular.
Sure. The first ones on the scene to nasty stuff, man.
Yes. State troopers come to mind.
Yep.
Because it's not like they're generally responding to a fender bender.
Right. That's something when I was in the hospital, they didn't, if you were working something awful, someone passes away, it's on to the next patient because now you have another stroke or a heart attack, or maybe it's an overdose, or God forbid something awful to a baby. Those are the worst. Or, you're sitting there doing chest compressions and you got to tap out because it's time to go to lunch.
Yeah.
You go to lunch and you come back.
Well, but
that's the reality.
I had to laugh, otherwise I'd cry because I know how serious it is. But the first responder, the attorneys have sort of experienced a different thing. The struggle with the attorney, and I'll speak to different kinds. The struggle for a criminal defense attorney, for example, would be fighting a continuous uphill battle.
Absolutely, that's what it appears to the layperson.
And sometimes knowing a guy is being either taken advantage of for any of a number of innocent reasons, and this is really rare. In my experience, it is incredibly rare that law enforcement takes advantage of their position. Incredibly rare. But sometimes the system, and this is not law enforcement focused, sometimes the system itself is slanted. And that's tough to be around sometimes. For criminal defense attorneys in particular.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Sometimes defendants without means, for example, are at an inherent disadvantage when it comes to bail, even with a low bail amount. And what do I mean by that? Well, $5,000 secured bond is different for you or I and
Mm-hmm.
somebody maybe.
Because they
Not
have to
any
pay
means.
what, 500 to get out? Is it 10% of the value of the wherever the bond's set at?
And generally, you're going to work through a bail bondsman, and it's not like
Mhm.
you're going to navigate that process on your own. But the point is this: sometimes someone without means is at an inherent disadvantage, not because the law is intended to be like that, but just because that's the way it plays out.
So there is this thing, I think in New York, where they lowered the bonds, right? Is that right?
And I haven't been paying attention.
Well, you've been busy. Here you go. Hit that bottom part of the mic. Maybe it'll come back. There we go.
All right.
Yeah, I think they're either talking about either going, or was it one of the political candidates is saying like no bail, or something like that. The value, because people who are at a disadvantage, it's not fair. They're stuck in there and they
Yeah.
can't get out because they don't have the means.
And that's a slippery slope too, because there's utility in it.
Sure,
When
yeah.
you get somebody violent in there, there's a purpose.
Well, right, and that's kind of the. I understand what they're saying,
yeah.
but there's also the
There's-
guy who's going to
there's-
take advantage of that. He's going to have 3 damn pigs,
Yeah, there's
and what are we going to do?
and then and then there's 4, and then you never know where it goes.
We got serial rapists. Well, hey, no bond. You got it. What are you going to do? Let him out. He said he wouldn't do it again.
And discretion sometimes is the best remedy to something like that, but discretion also leads to inconsistent results. So that's why, for example, in criminal superior court, there's a structured sentencing grid.
Mm.
Takes a lot of the discretion out of the sentencing decision for a judge. That's to prevent inconsistent decisions and also to avoid abuse of discretion. But there are plenty of opportunities where full discretion would be called for.
Mm-hmm.
A slippery slope either way. I don't know the answer to that.
Everything's a damn slippery slope.
It
It
is.
seems. So now you guys are.
You just got to do the best you can every decision.
Is it not?
Sometimes not fix everything. Just do the best you can today, right now. This one decision.
And if you actually mess up and make a mistake, learn from it and don't do it again.
That's exactly right.
Right. God knows I made a lot of them.
Yeah. Hey,
So now tomorrow you actually are having there's a fundraiser for you.
Mhm.
Is that correct? And where is that being held?
yeah, this one is more of a meet and greet, and I am definitely accepting donations in this thing. But the purpose is to get down to Mooresville and meet some folks down there.
Gotcha.
And this is at Trump National from 6 to 8.
From 6 to 8.
Mhm.
And so if anybody wanted to come to
Yeah,
meet you,
it's a drop-in.
okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Shake
there's-
hands and kiss babies.
Yeah, you could do that.
All right.
I'll,
No, you're gonna
I'll
be doing
have a. I have told myself I'm gonna run a genuine campaign. So if I shake your hand, I'll mean it. But I don't. I think there will be there will be a small level of speech go on 6:45 or so, just
Mhm.
depending on the crowd. It's
Okay.
also going to be raining cats and dogs, so I don't know
Right.
if that'll do the numbers.
All right. Well, and now, how can people learn, obviously, from this show, but learn more about you? Do you have a website, or is there a
Yeah.
Facebook page, or how can people find more about Will?
Yeah, there's Facebook page, Will Long on Facebook. VoteWillLong.com is out there.
Okay.
And, I will be making pointed efforts to get in front of as many people as I can between now and March 3rd to not only tell them why it's important to vote, but specifically why it's important to pay attention to who your judicial candidates are, and more specifically to tell them why I think I'm the best judicial candidate available for the Superior Court judge seat.
Well, I think that's well said, and I appreciate you taking a step forward and being a leader as a future 5 guy.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
And doing what you do for the community and the underprivileged, and seeing that need and trying to fill that void.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you coming on the show. I hope everybody now knows a little bit more about Will Long. And the date of
appreciate it.
vote is
March 3rd is the day. Early voting starts February 13th, so we're 8 days,
So
less
next
than 8
week.
days. Yeah,
All right.
it's February 13th through the 29th.
if you're not registered to vote, do it. Go register.
Yep, quickly.
And quickly and get out to vote.
Yeah,
Just
but
vote. You need to vote. Everyone needs to vote.
Yeah, and I appreciate the courtesy, man.
Yeah, man, I
Very
appreciate
thankful.
it, man.
I'm
Well,
very convinced that I can do a lot of good from that seat. So
I think
thankful
so,
for
man.
anybody out there checking me out. Do your research. look me up, look up my opponent, and make an educated decision.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you for coming on, and thank you to States Vegas Clothing Company, our sponsor, Integrity Securities, Casey Tate at Farm Bureau Insurance, and Hunk of Junk Calling. Thanks, guys. We'll see you again soon. See ya.
Thanks.